as we get started here. And what I'm going to do today, we will go ahead and get started while the tea is being served. And thank you, Anand. The story, thank you, sir, of the dog's tooth.
Thank you.
So this comes out of the Tibetan tradition. It's probably a broader story than that, but the particular version I have comes out of the Tibetan tradition. There was, many years ago, there was a, oops, I did something wrong here. There was a merchant who lived with his mother in Tibet. He's a silk merchant, and he used to regularly travel down to Tibet to buy and sell silks. And when he went down there, and he and his mother were both Buddhists, when he went down, his mum said, "Please bring me a relic of the Buddha." He said, "Sure." So he went down and he came back and he didn't. And she said it again and he didn't. And it just went on for years. And finally, after many years of this, she said, and he could see there was seriousness in her face, she said, "Next time you go down, bring me a relic of the Buddha or I will kill myself." Okay. So he went down to northern India and he traveled around in India, buying and selling silks and making a bunch of money. And I don't know if he was a net buyer or a net seller, but however it happened, he went home that time. It was a particularly successful trip. And he went home with a big bag of money. He was very excited. So he got home, and as he was getting right into the neighborhood where he lived, he thought, "Oh, the relic, oh no." And my mother was so serious. What am I going to do? So he looked around and thought, what am I going to do? He's getting into kind of a panic. And he saw a dog carcass on the side of the street. Oh, goodness. So he went over to the dog's carcass and poked around, and he pulled a tooth out. He said, "I will tell my mother this is the Buddha's tooth." And so it's really a very special relic. I don't know how many teeth the Buddha had, but it's probably the magical 32, because there's 32, right? So this is really special, one of the Buddha's teeth. So he went, he wrapped it in a nice piece of his special silk, some top grade silk he had. And when he got home, he could see his mother was standing on the step waiting for him. She'd seen him coming. And she had this deadly serious look on her face. And he knew, "I'm glad I did that, because I know she would have done it." So he ceremonially presented her with this tooth and its silk and explained what it was. And she was so excited. She took the tooth and she ran into their shrine and put it on the altar, and she started prostrating and praying, and I got away with that. This went on. So she'd go in there every day and she'd pray and she'd prostrate and she'd pray. And it went on for days. Starting to get a little bit worried about this. It went on for weeks. It went on for months. And his mum would spend most of her day in there praying to the dog's tooth. What do I do with this? I need to tell her. So one day he decided, she was in the shrine, he said, "I've got to break it to her." So he opened the door of the shrine room to go in there and tell his mother what he'd done. And his jaw dropped, because there was this glow coming from the altar. The tooth was radiating light. So he didn't tell her. And then when she died, in the Tibetan tradition, there's this thing called assuming the rainbow body. And when she died, she assumed the rainbow body, which basically means the whole physical body transmutes. And I've just realized there's a little hook in this one as well. I think actually with the rainbow body, everything transmutes except the teeth. I think that's what happened actually. So anyway, so she assumed the rainbow body. Wow. Beautiful story, I think. My head was standing on one end when I was telling it to you. I find it a really moving story. So I bring that up. Obviously, it's about prayer. Why do I talk to a bunch of Buddhists about prayer, right? When I was a kid, I grew up in the UK, so I've got to match grade levels here. So it would be 7th or 8th grade, probably 7th grade. I started having religious education. It was a 3-year religious education program. And the textbook I was given for our religious education was the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. That's the culture I grew up. Right? So what I had as religion showed up to me as this old white guy with a big bushy beard sitting on a cloud, and we're supposed to pray to him and ask him to intercede in our lives and help us. And that just didn't work for me. So when I reached a point in my middle adult life where I was looking for something, and I moved away from building a religion out of the Big Bang and evolution, Buddhism spoke to me deeply because it was an internal journey, meditation, and there was none of this prayer nonsense. It was really meaningful to me. And I know a lot of people, Westerners who move into Buddhism, do the same. And a lot of them who go into Tibetan Buddhism find it kind of strange after a while, because very soon in the Tibetan tradition, you find yourself engaging in a lot of people do anyway, engaging in a lot of prayer, because there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the various, what you call them, the fierce deities, and there's all sorts of deities show up, and then there's all the dakinis. And so there's a lot of prayer shows up in a lot of Tibetan Buddhist practice. Could you turn the lights on? Thank you. And then we've got, it shows up a lot actually. So you've got the Pure Land tradition, and the Pure Land, it doesn't show up as obviously as prayer, but the Pure Land tradition, and I will there's this thing we do on Thursday evenings. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to start covering the Pure Land tradition. It'll be 2 or 3 weeks, probably 2 weeks, talking about the Pure Land tradition, which is really fascinating and very powerful. One of the deep elements of the Pure Land tradition is the distinction between self-power and other power. And a lot of the Buddhist practices that the people in this room are familiar with are self-powered traditions. We do the work. We take charge of our practice and move ourselves to awakening. The Pure Land tradition is exactly the opposite. It is an other power-centered practice. So, Namo Amituofo, Namo Amituofo, Namo. That I take refuge in Amida Buddha. And that's 4 times, and then repeat for a very long time, years. And what that's about, it's surrendering into other power. There's a whole faith which roughly 1 billion people follow, whose name roughly translates into English. It's an Arabic word, so it's got doesn't translate literally, but one of the ways it comes across is surrender. Islam. And the whole faith is about surrender. Salat in Islam is prayer. Salat, when Muslims pray 5 times a day, they assume the prostrations, and that's salat, that's making salat. And you're asking, one of the important things is to ask that your prayer is acceptable to God. The Muslims will often sit after they've done their salat, and they'll do dhikr, and they've got dhikr beads, which they've got, like a rosary. And this is it's used in the Sufi tradition. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. And it's said again and again and again. It's part of the Shahada, which is the profession of faith. There is no God but God. Of course, it's Arabic, and it's in a different tradition, and the words don't translate literally, and so it doesn't quite mean that. When it's repeated in this form, what it comes to mean is something more along the lines of, there's the internal, so the first word, first God is kind of with a lowercase g, and the second is like the one God with a capital G. There is no God but God. And so it kind of loosely becomes more like there is nothing, or there is no self. And then it looks out and says, and everything is God. Which is the same unity in oneness, diversity in oneness, unity in abundance that is at the heart of our practice. Right? It's exactly the same thing. And that is reached through submission and through prayer, which I find really beautiful. Submission is also, I mean, I talked about the Pure Land, I mean, going back to Buddhism. Shunryu Suzuki, to me, famously said, probably not that famous really, but he said, there are no enlightened beings. No, that he said that too. There are no enlightened beings. There is only enlightened activity, which is beautiful. But he also said, more apropos this conversation, awakening is an accident. We can't make it happen. We can make ourselves accident prone, but we can't make it happen. And what that's about exactly what I'm talking about here. We can't control this. We're not in charge. We can do a lot of work, but ultimately we're not in charge. The accident happens. That's other power. That's something else that is that last tip. Koan practice is another way that this works. You can't take a koan. You're assigned a koan by your teacher in the Rinzai Zen tradition, and you hold that koan, then you recite and repeat the koan, and it ultimately reduces to just a word or a short phrase, and then more to like a feeling landing in the belly, and it's just something that is there and you're working with. You can't decide to solve a koan and go back and present the answer in Sanzen to your teacher. It doesn't work that way. It works precisely by letting go, trusting, and the answer emerges. Where does it come from? It doesn't emerge because we're doing it. It emerges precisely because we let go. We use this as a tool to take us into letting go. So I'll finish up with just a little bit of a personal anecdote, which is fairly recently. So dream yoga, very common. I mean, it's just one of the core Tibetan practices is dream yoga. Enlightened beings are present 24/7 by 365. If you think about it, that really shouldn't be a huge surprise, because being aware is being aware. There's no great difference between being aware in this dream, being aware in that dream, being aware in dreamless sleep. It's just being aware. If one cultivates really strong concentration, one can land on that concentration and follow that concentration into sleep. Where technically it becomes difficult as one starts to do this is the first time you go into sleep, you drop right down into deep dreamless sleep. And you need really strong concentration to go through that and come back out the other side, right? But in principle, hopefully it makes complete sense that this idea of following concentration and staying aware in your sleep and in your dreams, it's really obvious. People should be able to do that as they cultivate spiritual practice. So, sidebar on that, that is the formless realm. So when we read in the Pali scriptures about Buddha meeting all of these gods and going up to Tushita heaven and all the rest, he's in the formless realm. He doesn't make a big deal about which particular dream world he's in, this one or that one. But, of course, he can land in the formless realm anytime he likes and do all sorts of stuff in there. It's continuous, absolutely continuous. So 2 or 3 years ago now, I decided, I've been spending, I don't know how long it is, 10, 20 years maybe, quite a long time, more than that, 25 years. And so I should have a reasonably decent level of concentration at this stage. It shouldn't be too hard for me to figure out how to do this. Turns out it is. So I tried that for several months, and then it's something funny going on here. And it's come up again several times recently in a number of different ways. It's like, I really should be able to do this. And so I tried it again. And there's a problem. And so I prayed. I prayed to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the enlightened beings, and I asked for some guidance and some signs and some help. And out of that, I have received some signs and some guidance and some help. And I realized one of those things that happens along the way, this funky stuff that I just didn't realize what was going on and I'd been playing with for years, much in like, I just stumbled into the jhanas. No, not the jhanas, the chakras. So, I mean, I found them by just practice. It just naturally, I mean, of course, it's going to happen because practice will take you there because people have been doing this for thousands of years. It's the way it unfolds. So I wouldn't have realized that. And that is, I'm confident, a really powerful tool in this journey I'm trying to play with right now. But I found that directly as a result of help. And there are blockages here that come from old childhood nonsense, and a bunch of it it's not, I mean, I could go harpoon and bayonet the wounded and blame all sorts of people, but a huge ton of it is stuff I did to myself when I was in my teens and my 20s. And that has become apparent to me because I've been willing to truly make myself vulnerable and open and just let go. I can't do this. Help. It's not a directed help, and many people in the Buddhist traditions, particularly the Tibetan tradition, would say, well, I'm praying to Buddha nature within. I'm not praying to anything outside. I'm just praying to my own inherent Buddha nature. So there's lots of ways of looking at this, but fundamentally it's assuming a posture of willing surrender. It brings us back to my favorite koan. It's been my favorite koan for many years, and it's one that Charlie and her daughter have been working with recently, which is not knowing. Just truly letting oneself not know. And by assuming a posture of just not knowing, not even knowing if help is available or not, but being willing to submit into that and allow that maybe it will. It allows one to keep one's eyes open, and it'll show up in the strangest places. If I wasn't open, the kind of things I'm talking about that have allowed me to learn some truths here, I would not even have seen. So all of this is to bring forward prayer, invite us to look at prayer in maybe a different way than most of us are used to looking at prayer, and invite us to look at the power of truly letting go, the power of submission and surrender, and the power of stepping into that surrender with a posture of just not knowing and being truly open to see what comes forward. So with